So yesterday I gave a full hour talk in the 101 section on ESG. There's going to be a lot more people here, so I'm going to give kind of a 20-minute breakdown of what I covered yesterday. If you were here for that talk, I apologize. It's going to be some redundancy, but it's important that people really understand the problem that we're facing. So, who am I? Handful of people know, so I appreciate that. So I was a private money mortgage broker, or a hard money mortgage broker, and I started that process in 2008. Graduated college after screwing around and drinking too much and partying and doing the college thing. And I came out into the mortgage field into the Great Recession. So I got no fun times. It was like launched right into the teeth of the lion. All of the loan originations had dried up. There was basically no investor capital because I was actually dealing with private investor capital. I didn't have access to the Fed window. So needless to say, private investors were running scared at that point. So my job ended up being liquidating foreclosed properties for my family business at the time. 5 years later, after liquidating all those properties, I go on to start my own private money mortgage fund. I end up managing a couple $100 million for about a decade, and then I retired when the lockdowns happened. Because I could no longer, as a fiduciary, evaluate risk, both on a macro or a micro level. It was very challenging times, and it's only gotten tougher since. So that's the main reason that I got involved with this movement, is because I felt as if I had a niche understanding when it came to both the business world, but also in true real-world application of Austrian economics, which very few of us are, blessed enough to get that chance. So I thought that I would have a very good, fertile ground talking to libertarians about these issues, because you guys are the only ones that actually understand economics on any level. So I appreciate you guys. You make me feel sane, and thank you for joining me in this fight, because I certainly couldn't do it alone. So the primary reason that I got so radicalized, I mean, I'm a second-gen libertarian, so I hated the Fed from birth, but when you start to actually kick people out of their houses because of the boom-bust cycle, it really drives home the fact that there's true human cost and human carnage that is left in the wake of the financial malfeasance of the system that we suffer under. Not to mention all of the people that suffer, mortal wounds overseas because of Federal Reserve existence, as Scott will tell you about later, I'm sure. The 2020 lockdowns really showed to me that we had shifted from kind of a democratic republic. Perhaps it transpired far before that, but it became very stark reality that we were now living under a technocracy. There was no democratic rule or will to be found. It was going to be the top scientists and the top doctors, not really the top, but the ones that have the most political sway, that got to dictate what we were going to do in response to an airborne pathogen. And that's not science, in case anyone was wondering, and we have all suffered the consequences of it. The technocracy is now transitioning from the medical field and really digging their teeth into the financial. I think that that's one area that I can really shed light on, because I understand investing in a really in-depth way, and ESG is their mechanism for control when it comes to economics and implementing their will. So that's the reason I've set out to try and explain it to as many people as possible. And it's a very dry subject, but because it has such far-reaching impact into our day-to-day life and into our investing lives, into every aspect of our lives, I feel like if we can frame it in a way that's at least somewhat understandable, it's so impactful in people's day-to-day lives, they have to care. They can't ignore it, even if they want to. Even if they don't understand economics, they still have to understand that, when you go to the gas station and you have to decide, basically, are you going to fill up or are you going to eat that day? Well, suddenly economics really matters. It's no longer in the academic realm. It is truly in your face. And because of the fast rise of my show, I was able to go on Timcast IRL by Tim Pool, and on it I was asked specifically about BlackRock. And at the time I didn't fully understand BlackRock's role in the implementation of ESG, so I downplayed their role in our real estate bubble. Huge mistake in hindsight, probably the biggest mistake I've made in my analyst career, if you want to call it that. I just thought that there was no way a single company could have that outsized sway when it come to when it came to such a vast investment item like housing. I mean, on the United States level, globally, it just seemed impossible. Little did I know that they were managing over $10 trillion, and their buddies, State Street and Vanguard, were managing about 10 trillion more between the two of them. And then the additional money managers that operate under ESG guidance were managing at least 30 trillion. Some estimates put it at 50 trillion. We're talking at least the GDP of the United States of America, perhaps 2 to 3x the annual GDP of the United States. That is enormous, enormous capital. That is enough capital to completely shift the face of the world. I mean, and I'm not overstating it. That is absolutely what it can do, and that's what they're attempting to do with it. So, quick backstory on ESG and how it came about. In 2004, Kofi Annan, who was the Secretary General of the UN, sends out a letter to 50 of the biggest businesses in the world, and he says, we need to implement environmental, social, and government changes through big business, through central banks and big business. And what do you know? All of the biggest businesses that he sends a letter to, which already have great relationships with the central banks of their local government, they respond positively. And they say, sounds like a great idea, Kofi. Absolutely. Which makes no sense to me, until you realize that it was because of the relationship with the central bank and the local governments that they had already been told, you either play ball or you get left in the dust. We can easily replace you. So that was really the beginning of the fascistic takeover of the global economy. And it has only gotten worse since then. 2020 really made it stark and unignorable. And ESG is just simply environment, which is obviously you're going to try and improve emissions and things like that when it comes to whatever business you're in. If you're an oil and gas company, you want to focus on renewables, blah, blah, blah. It's all bullshit, but that's what they say. Social is social justice, so they will try and have woke policies that are implemented within the business, and then governance is that they are going to have diversity quotas on their boards and things of that nature. None of it actually amounts to a hard and fast rule of like, this is what you have to do. It is a black box, a constantly shifting window by which they can implement whatever they want, and they can punish whoever they want, and they can accomplish nothing for the left who believes in these policies deeply. So that's the main reason that I'm trying to reach out in a bipartisan fashion, is because if you are the type that believes that anthropogenic global warming is the end of humanity, well then you're not getting what you think you're getting when you support ESG. A good example of this would be State Street, who has about $4 to $5 trillion under management. They're the third biggest money manager in the United States. In, I think it was 2010 or so, they had an issue where on their fields there was huge income disparity or payment disparity between the male and female employees. There was also a bunch of sexual assaults, but I'll leave that aside for now. In response to that, they decide that they're going to fund an artist to the tune of millions of dollars. Instead of paying their employees, equal pay, they say, we're going to build a statue and we're going to put it across the way from the bull on Wall Street. And that's their solution. That's how they make sure that women are paid their fair share. Now, anybody understands that doesn't actually amount to any real world changes, but this is what ESG is at its core. It is virtue signaling while ignoring the true problems that your business may be creating. And businesses do create problems. There is externalities that comes with oil and gas production, things like that. I don't think it does libertarians any justice to ignore it. But ultimately, you're not actually remedying these problems, so it's just a lie. It's just a ruse, and unfortunately, so few people actually understand what's happening, especially on the left. A few are waking up, thankfully, but it's not improving at this point, so it's a huge problem. So now enter BlackRock and Larry Fink. Larry Fink is this incredibly pompous CEO of BlackRock who writes these shareholder letters every year, in which he actually, and this is not an exaggeration, he actually says, global CEOs, if you want my capital, you need to do X, Y, and Z. This is one man dictating to every big business on earth, saying, I expect you to do environment, social, governance, these policies, or I will divest of your company. And I, coincidentally, happen to manage the most money of any human being on earth other than central banks. So that is tremendous sway. And he is using it in a very cunning fashion. Fortunately, because of people like James Lindsay and Vivek Ramaswamy, people are starting to wake up to this game, this sham for what it is, and they're starting to push back. And you're starting to now see, especially if you're paying attention to ESG like I am, you'll see more and more articles in the Wall Street Journal and things like that where they say it appears that there's a populist revolt that's starting to buck up against ESG, and I'm like, yeah, there is. And I'm playing like this big of a role in it, and it makes me so happy. So thank you guys for actually knowing about it. And what would any good conspiracy theory be without Klaus Schwab? World Economic Forum has these meetings at Davos every year, and they invite, wouldn't you know, all the biggest CEOs on earth. But then they put in tandem with that, they put all of the most powerful politicians on earth. And they put them all in the same room, and they all talk about the same bullshit, and they all dictate not only what the corporations are going to do, but what the governments are going to do to suppress people that don't go along with it, and to benefit and create more and more crony contracts to the CEOs that are willing to play ball. This is not capitalism. And the most irritating aspect of all this to me is that I love capitalism. I think it's the greatest thing that has ever happened to humanity, and it is being bastardized in a way that is damaging people, sincerely. So because of this, you now have almost every major business and every major political leader that is pushing wokeness. And wokeness, in its origin, perhaps not that bad of a thing. Be nicer to people. I'm good with that. It gets problematic when you start to go to the level of only focusing on our surface level differences. We're no longer just talking about being a good person. We're talking about representation on the most simplistic surface level means. Our skin color, our gender. That is, by no stretch of the imagination should that be considered a progressive stance. It is regressive by nature, it's appalling, and it is tearing at the seams of our civilization and our society, and especially in America, because we have such a, kind of a media 24/7 blitz telling us that our skin color separates us. So ESG is part of propagating this division. And I believe strongly that unless we defeat it in a sincere fashion, they will succeed in creating race riots, civil wars, things of that nature. So time is really running out. And the economic ramifications from ESG ultimately are not sustainable because they are not focusing on cost cutting, innovation, production, all the normal things that a good CEO of a company would focus on. Instead, he's focusing on how can I get funding from BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard? Does that seem like the best idea for a CEO to just be focusing on the back end where he gets his funding? Or should you be focusing on the consumer and delivering a good that they actually want? Well, in a fair market, these businesses would get their lunches eaten, rightfully, because they aren't focusing on innovation. But that's not the game now. Because ESG is backed by the central banks, they're able to get unlimited capital to continue and perpetuate these business models which are not delivering the best goods on market. That is not sustainable, but because they have the backing of central banks which can print into infinity, they think it is. So I think that that's actually a huge part of what we've experienced over the past 2 years that no one really talks about. We all talk about the lockdowns, the money printing that increased the inflation, but I think there is also something to be said for the lack of productivity when it comes to these businesses that are focusing no longer on cost-cutting, production, innovation, but are instead focusing on ESG, which doesn't increase production. In fact, many of these big businesses are divesting themselves of energy. We are now all paying the price for that. Perfect example, in Germany, they had, I think it was like a decade ago, they banned all nuclear power there. And then they decide to shift to wind and quote-unquote renewables. That doesn't deliver enough energy, so now they become completely reliant on, who else? Russia. And then the pipeline starts to be a source of geopolitical turmoil, and now because they're basically the pawn of the United States in this proxy war between Ukraine and Russia, they are at the whims of Vladimir Putin, which not a huge fan, but I certainly wouldn't want that guy to be in charge of whether or not I'm able to eat or turn on my lights or heat my house during winter. And they have put themselves in that position because of ESG. Stupid. They deserve it exactly what they're getting in terms of the government level, but the people there that had no say in this whatsoever, that thought that they were just going along with some greening of the economy, now may freeze to death or starve to death. And I'm talking first world. You get to the third world level, and you're talking hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that will have to migrate, that will be starving to death because they don't have grains, they don't have the food that they need. It's a huge problem, and it's genuine, human suffering that we're talking about here. I think that's the one thing that libertarians are so good at when we actually talk about war, but when we talk about economics, we suck at it. We don't actually get down to the human pain that comes from top-down, big government, big business in tandem, basically making us all suffer. So I know this kind of plays into a populist language, and I don't care, because I think that I am a populist probably. But I think it's really important that we're able to convey this to people in a way that strikes at home, where they can actually understand the ramifications from these policies, because otherwise it just gets too in the ether. They can't really wrap their heads around it. Well, they can wrap their heads around it when they can't afford to eat. All right. I got to speed up here. I got a lot to cover. Sorry. Good example of this. Standard & Poor's is one of the biggest rating agencies out there. The same bastards that rated collateralized debt obligations when it came to the 2008-2009 crisis. Moody's, all these guys, they rubber stamp a bunch of toxic garbage debt, and then they allowed the investors to be holding the bag, pension funds, things like that, and then the government swoops in and bails them out. Same thing's happening when it comes to ESG, wouldn't you know? So I believe that the next collapse will come in the form of these businesses that are propagating ESG, because it's not a sustainable business model. Good example of this is Exxon and Tesla. Exxon has a highly rated investment ESG score. Tesla is not investable. Does that make sense to anybody in here? Doesn't make sense to me. So this is a huge problem because it's, again, just demonstrating the BS game. It's because Elon is not woke, so they don't get a good ESG score. Doesn't matter that they're producing the most electric cars on Earth. Doesn't matter that they're innovating better than anybody. That's how it works. I think the biggest problem is that ESG at its core is making our culture fray, because there's no longer an escape hatch. You can't actually go out and get competitive products. Good example of this would be, Parler after January 6th. If you guys remember, Parler comes out of nowhere. They get backed by Donald Trump and a handful of other big political figures, and they say, we're going to be the home of uncensorable speech. Well, after January 6th, Amazon Web Services, Apple, Google, a bunch of others respond by saying, okay, we're going to shut down your business. So it's their relationship to the government and ESG that allows them to do that, because if they don't do it, they get dragged up on Capitol Hill, where they're threatened with all sorts of suppression and regulations and things like that. So the government is now circumventing the Bill of Rights using ESG to suppress our freedom of speech. So this is why I get so frustrated when libertarians talk about, it's a private business, bro. It's not really a private business now, is it? If Amazon is doing the bidding of the government, what's the difference between the government actually suppressing our speech directly? I'd say that difference is negligible at best and ignorable if you want to actually save our rights. The way the attack works is you have a cultural revolution that's happening on the left-hand side. If you know anything about warfare, you're seeing it in Ukraine right now, actually, from Russia. They call it a pincer attack. It's from the left, you have the woke kids that have just recently graduated from Ivy League schools that are coming out, entering HR, entering hiring facilities, and they're able to basically implement wokeism from the left and cancel culture and things of that nature. And then from the right, you have ESG via BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, where they will rip your funding if you don't go along with wokeism. So this dual-pronged attack is working incredibly efficiently. So much so that people that work in corporate America are horrified to speak out. I'm sure some of you here, hopefully not many of you, but I'm sure some of you here work for Fortune 500 companies and you know what I'm talking about. There is a terrible speech suppression, speech chilling that's happening where people are afraid to speak out because they'll lose their job, and I don't blame them. It's a very tough position to be in, but I'm not sure that most people understand how this came to pass, and that's how. So as I said, there's about 30 to 50 trillion that's under ESG guidance. If this tide is not stemmed, I would imagine that it'll get north of 100 trillion very rapidly. The biggest concern I have is that Larry Fink, in an interview recently, said that he expects within 5 years, he said it 2 years ago, so I guess within the next 3 years, he expects that 80% of all S&P 500 companies that are not going along with ESG guidance will be bankrupted. So they fully believe that they will prevail, and I think that he's right unless there is a popular revolt where we start to push back against this in a meaningful way. And so why is this all bad? I think you already know, but Sri Lanka just collapsed. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. The reason it happened is because they stopped producing fertilizer under ESG. So they don't have enough food now, and they don't have enough money to pay for imports. So their people are rioting and burning down buildings because they can't eat. This is a direct, real-world result of ESG, and I don't think people are recognizing why this stuff is coming to pass. It's also a product of lockdowns, which I think is further evidence of the technocracy we now live in. It's totally detached from, the realities of scarcity and human need. Just last week, the Congress of America drafted a bill supported by the Biden White House to add racial equity to the Fed mandate. The Fed mandate consisted of, and don't get me wrong, I hate the Fed and I hate its mandate, so I'd rather just abolish it, but their prior mandate was price stability and maximal employment, right? They're now adding racial equity to that evaluation. I want you guys to really process and internalize what that means. They're now saying that if you're looking at unemployment and you're seeing that, say, unemployment's at 3%, and you're like, well, we should probably hike interest rates, right, under normal Fed policy, but they go, but black unemployment's at 6%, so we have to keep rates ultra low. In my opinion, it's a total BS, shell game where they're just trying to give themselves additional ammo to implement modern monetary theory. I don't know if I'm talking over your guys' heads. I think you're with me here. It's not good. It's very, very bad to include racial equity at the federal level with the printing press backing it. I think that is the end game. I mean, there's no coming back from that if we allow that to happen. Hopefully, the Senate, who's filled with traitors who just went after our guns just last night, there's a chance that they will vote that down. But if they don't, God help us. I mean, the Fed will be completely unleashed and able to do whatever they want moving forward. What's that? I know. God bless the Free State, brother. I'm not. So the ultimate outcome of all this is that the CBDC, the central bank digital currency, will replace the dying fiat because of the malfeasance of spending and the fiat, which is dying all over the world. I personally believe that if CBDC is to be rolled out and accepted en masse, it'll be a total panopticon of which we cannot escape. I mean, other than the people in the Free State, I think that 99% of people on Earth will be completely at the mercy of central bankers and the governments which work in tandem with them to spy on us, stop your ability to purchase whatever you want, purchase food, be able to get a home loan, things of that nature. All of it will make it impossible for political dissidents, and everyone in this room would be classified as a political dissident if you're doing your job right. So it's vitally important that we wake people up before this happens. My expectation is that as this economy unwinds over the next year to two, they will turn to the people and they'll say, well, sure, you can't afford to eat, but we're going to start, UBI. We're going to put 2,000 US dollar coins in your account, and from there, you'll be able to function. And that's all it'll take. And right away, in order to sign up, they'll have all of your biometrics and things like that are in line with it, and it's game over at that point. So it really is now or never. So, sorry, I'm really driving home the point here, but I'm going to get to the good stuff eventually. So here's where we come in. Obviously, I stand in one of the freest places on earth, thanks to you guys, so I appreciate the Free State Project and what you guys are doing. I think that this is a great example of what can be done and what must be done in the interim phase between now and whenever fiat dies. So I think that along with, obviously, emphasizing 10th Amendment rights, secession, if we're lucky enough to get there, and if not, nullification at the state level is vitally important. So I think that the Free State Project and being able to take minor political victories here and there is going to be mandatory. I mean, we're going to have some state buffers from state action, or else it'll be completely untenable. I hope I'm wrong, but I wouldn't bet on it. I think that the most hopeful aspect of things is that, and honestly, I think that the reason our tyrannical situation is, expedited, it's gotten so much worse over the past couple decades, is because of the internet, because it has sped up their necessity to try and compete with us as we try and compete to become more free. So it's kind of moving, in tandem, where we come up with a handful of innovations that make us more free. They go, oh shit, we better cut them off at the pass. So the tyranny is increasing very rapidly, but I think it's because we are innovating our ways out of this. So I'm not without hope. I think that, I don't know if Jeremy Kaufman's in the audience, but I think a guy like him is exactly what we need more of. And unfortunately, I'm not a computer programmer. I'm an old school money guy, so I can't help in this process, but I'll fund whatever project Jeremy wants me to. I think that those, library, Odyssey, decentralized social media, what's the name of it? The Mastodon and the Fediverse. I really think that increases our capacity to speak freely, to warn people about what's happening. I think that the biggest problem over the past couple of years is that the speech suppression online has gotten so severe. It's I just, speaking for myself, I know that I'm constantly curtailing what I truly want to say. Or at least I'm watering it down, just because I want to keep my account. And that's a terrible position to be in, because I'm pissed and I want to demonstrate it. And I want people to feel it, And if I have to say it in, some milquetoast fashion, it doesn't give me the same, capacity to reach people. So I'm sure everyone feels that. Fortunately, hopefully some of you guys aren't on social media and you're living your lives. God bless you. All right. So I want to just talk briefly about what I think the economy could look like if we were to defeat ESG and defeat central banking. And I know this is very far-fetched, it feels like, at this point. But I do believe that in our lifetime, I really feel as if we stand at a precipice between more human liberty than has ever existed on the planet and possibly more human suffering than has ever existed on the planet. It's an important inflection point. That's a fork in the road that both horrifies me and gives me tremendous resolve every day to work harder and faster and more intelligently, and to network and to innovate in ways that I never felt when I was young. So, we have a chance. We have maybe just one chance. And fortunately, I believe that people that are sitting in this room today will be those that innovate and save humanity. I know that sounds totally ridiculous. I genuinely believe it. I believe that there are people in here, Scott's one of them, that would ever imagine a single person could do. And that is all a part of the technology that we're now blessed with. It's a double-edged sword, because the government can use those same technologies to suppress and oppress us. So it's a race. And if the libertarians don't stop infighting and arguing amongst each other, we may lose that race. So let's try and work together. So let's just imagine, this far off distant land, that we've actually eliminated central banking. Well, if anyone's familiar with the rule of 72, you take 72, you divide it by the interest rate of your investment, and that's the doubling time. It's very simple math. So 72, if you get a 12% annualized return, that means that your investment doubles every 6 years. It's just like investing 101. However, because of inflation and taxes, you always have to look at that and say, well, it would double if not for inflation and taxes. So by the time I get to that, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow when my loan matures and I get paid off, my actual investing assets are now down by 15% because of inflation, and then I've also been taxed to death on the gains that I made. So the reason I think that this is so hopeful, and the reason I think this is something that we should really strive towards, is because it allows us to accumulate wealth. And I think that has been the major negative ramification of the ever-increasing and encroaching state over the past, my entire life and much longer, is that it makes it much harder to accumulate wealth. And people that can't accumulate wealth turn towards the state for help. So this is a vicious cycle in which we are forced to remain and grow increasingly impoverished, while also being further and further at the mercy of the state, which doesn't give a shit about us. So this vicious cycle must be stopped at its root. The root is the Federal Reserve, and that is why I'm making it my mission to speak out against it, even though I know this is like old school Ron Paul libertarian stuff. I think he was right. I think it is, other than ending the wars, I think that the most important thing is ending central banking. And ultimately, I believe central banking is an even bigger danger because it ultimately enables the endless wars amongst every other evil that we deal with. All right, so no central banks means no bailouts. That means that investors proceed at their own risk. Old school capitalism. You make a good decision and you prevail, good for you. You make a dumb decision, you go bankrupt, walk it off. That's the only way capitalism functions. You have to burn the dead brush. We haven't allowed it to burn in decades and decades, and we are suffering terribly because of it. As I said earlier, there'd be significantly less war if we actually had to pay for it, if they had to tax us as it was actually occurring. They don't have to do that. They borrow it, they print it. The American people never really feel it until it's too late, and then they think that it's a product of the current president when in fact it's the product of the past four. Unfortunately, the vast majority of people don't understand the delayed or the knock-on effects that come from money printing and waiting for it to actually enter the economy. So they constantly blame the wrong people. Trump has skated on his responsibility for the terrible inflation we're now suffering, and I think that, it's obviously a bipartisan problem. I know I hate Biden as much as anybody in here, but let's be honest, the economy was going to be destroyed because of lockdowns, and Trump presided over that. I think that the most hopeful aspect of ending central banking would be that there would be so much less income inequality. And I know people think that seems kind of counterintuitive, but it's not. The primary reason that there are so many billionaires across the planet now is because they have relationships, by and large, with their local government. It's very, very difficult to become a billionaire without working with the government. Look at Elon Musk. Elon Musk is the richest man on earth, but if it weren't for subsidies, he would not be that. So even the guy that's espousing, seemingly libertarian ideals half the time, if not for his relationship to government, he wouldn't be worth $200+ billion. Or maybe it's more than that, I don't know. So I think that's a real thorn in the side of people that really believe in capitalism, is we can't actually convey to the average person why income inequality is both not a problem and also a terrible injustice because of how it's coming about. Because I don't believe that if you work hard and you innovate and you get someone to voluntarily purchase whatever product you've created, there's nothing wrong with becoming tremendously wealthy. Now, there is something terribly and deeply immoral when you become one of the richest people on the planet because of your relationship to the government and oppression and theft and violence. So, until we're able to cut that tie, I think that you're going to have more and more people, not just in America, but also across the world, that are demanding Marxist solutions to what amounts to a Marxist reality today, where central banks control the means of production when it comes to the creation of money. What's really great about this too is that I think that because we would now have further innovation, because we come up with decentralized technologies when it comes to social media, things of that nature, you would be able to have less cancel culture, which means better social cohesion. I think social cohesion is probably the thing that I miss most about the pre-Trump era. It wasn't nearly as contentious. I didn't feel as if people hated me for X, Y, and Z. It was just kind of like, I either hate you because you suck or I like you, And now it's like, well, what's your political affiliation? What's your skin color? Like things that I really thought we had gotten past, we've now reverted to. So I think that's a very hopeful thing that could come from decentralized technologies, especially on the social media level when it comes to being able to communicate with one another. I think the saddest part about all of this is that the left is really creating the monsters they claim to be slaying. As you suppress people who are not woke, Tower Gang, my people. Unfortunately, some of the younger people out there that haven't been around long enough to really cement their own character and who they are as a person will respond to speech suppression and being banned from X, Y, and Z platform and start to become truly angry, and start to say, well, if you're going to call me a racist, then I am one. If you're going to call me a Nazi, all right, I'll be one. This isn't helpful in any way. And I know, because I've seen it, that there are more and more young people that are especially young white men, that are feeling as if they're going to go and be with their people, be with the other people that are oppressed. It's a very similar phenomenon to what you saw with the Black Panthers. No one wants to really look at it because we're not allowed to have any sympathy for white people, but do you want to live in that world, I really don't. I don't want to live in a world where we judge people off their skin color. And I think that until we defeat both central banking and ESG, it's going to be harder and harder. I mean, we could take little Band-Aids here and there when it comes to DeSantis, or maybe if Trump were to be reelected, where they could come up with some bills to put a Band-Aid on it. But at its root, we're being divided because of government, as always. So the most important aspect of ending central banking and having decentralized technologies that take off is that we would have just a dramatically smaller government. Obviously, most of us won't rest until we have no government, but a minarchist interim ground would be welcome respite from the tyranny that we exist under today. And I think that another big aspect to appreciate would be that we would actually have to live within our means, that the government could no longer borrow and print and spend. I mean, they could still borrow to some extent, but within reason. And what that means is that there's no empire. And as Sky will tell you, the empire is probably the worst aspect of our current regime. And it is definitely bipartisan in nature. And then the most hopeful aspect of all this is that I believe with a truly freed capitalist market, we would have increasing abundance, plentiful energy through competition and innovation as opposed to cronyism. Only when we recognize and call out this reprehensible alliance between the government and big business can we hope to defeat them. They only rule through obfuscation, and I pray that everyone living here, or listening here today, can begin to assist me in spreading the disinfectant of truth to foil their well-laid plans. Thank you guys so much. I have 5 more minutes if anybody has any questions. There's a mic right here.
So I've been studying the CFA to be a financial analyst, and recently the CFA
Good for
Institute.
you, man.
Thanks. The CFA Institute has come up with like their own ESG certification, and I know, although obviously share a lot of sentiments with you about where this is heading, should someone in my position kind of play ball with these people to be able to speak their language and constantly inject some sanity into their decision-making process and be able to wield those terms and things like that? Or
It's a great question, because I personally believe that libertarians 10 years from now will look upon people that are working in ESG and be like, that's a libertarian who's a cop, you know? And it's tragic that that's likely going to be our future. But I don't actually think there's anything wrong with being a cop if you're like, hey, I'm going to not enforce victimless crimes. You'd probably get fired really fast. So I think that's the jeopardy that you'll run, is that if you try and really buck this, they'll fire you. So you're going to have to find that balance, and I can't tell you, what that is. I think that we need people kind of in the inside that are working to undermine it. So I hope you'll do that. But I wish you luck, man. It's a tough spot to be in.
Thanks.
Thanks.
First, a comment and a question. So the last part you were saying actually reminded me of a famous quote, and I believe you, that banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies.
Yes, indeed.
And my question, actually, and I was thinking, is, so it appears, at least since 2017, possibly later, that the central banks have entered the culture war. Do you believe that to be an evolution of tactics or an act of desperation?
Probably a little bit of both, but I actually believe that the CIA, who studied, Marxism and came up with some of these plans when it comes to race relations in America, have been actively implementing this. So I think it's just a natural progression that you would have central banks and more government entities that start to embrace those same tactics. It's really just classic divide and conquer from my vantage point. I totally have to put my tinfoil hat on to talk about any of this stuff, but It's the only explanation I can come up with, because it just seems so evident that race relations were far, far better before we started to focus on all of the injustices of race in this country. So I don't know what other conclusion to come to. Sorry, I don't know if that answered your question, but.
No, for sure. I think there is a combination of both. But from your vantage point, I was curious if you see one as more likely than the other, or more powerful than the other.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that there's. I don't know if this directly is in alignment with your specific question, but I think that the desperation is very evident from the federal government and the central banks of the world. I mean, what they're doing, most people aren't even familiar with this, but there was $20 trillion in bailouts that happened in 2019 prior to the lockdowns. 6 months later, they locked down the global economy. I have to wonder if that wasn't intentional to suppress demand, as they realized that the entire house of cards was about to come crumbling down. The lockdown certainly gave them the ability to write a bunch of blank checks and to bail out all of their inside operatives and kick the can, so to speak. And I think we're now paying the price for that. But I think that they're both desperate and cunning. So I try not to go one way or the other.
Excellent.
Sure. Oh, yes.
You're taller than I expected you to be.
Oh. I don't know why. I got to adjust my camera.
How do you think that someone who has a small reach can make the biggest impact to open people's eyes?
Man, grow your reach. Take HGH, become taller. I honestly, I think that there's nothing wrong with not seeking a social media presence and focusing on your local community, your family. I think that's part of the reason that our civilization has kind of come unglued, is because we've stopped focusing on family first and then working from there. So I think if you're, a housewife or a house dad and you're just raising your kids, but you're raising them with your principles, and then they go on to create incredible things. I mean, look at the Ron Paul revolution that created the Dave Smith revolution that creates whatever revolution. It's like you can play a small role and you don't know how it will butterfly effect into the future. So don't look at, I don't have that many followers on social media, so I'm not making a difference. You could have no followers and be making a far, far more important difference than I am. So keep it up.
So my question, you studied ESG, and it looks like they're wasteful and they're abused and they create like some unintended consequences, but generally it could be said about most of the government programs that they're ineffective and so on. So like my question, do you see anything that outright criminal with what you uncovered when you studied ESG?
Well, I think that it's because I was a fiduciary, because I was actually managing hundreds of millions of dollars and I had liability for every dollar that I invested. I think that there is a real argument to be had that the money managers of the world that are implementing ESG are doing so at the detriment of their shareholders, to the benefit of their stakeholders, and that is breaking their fiduciary responsibility. So I would like to see them held criminally liable for breaking that agreement. Whether or not a judge would uphold it, I don't know.
Hi, Clint. When are you moving to the free state of New Hampshire?
I just got to Florida, man. Cut me some slack. Honestly, this is my first time. This is my, I've been here for 36 hours now, so I love it so far. I haven't experienced a winter yet, though, so I don't know. I'm open to it, though. I'm open to it.
How would you define wokeism?
Well, you can either define it how the woke would like me to, or I can define it how I think it's actually applied. Personally, I think that wokeism is calling anything that goes against state power racist. That's my personal opinion of it, but that's probably not an answer you'll like.
And homophobic.
Yes.
Clint, when is the Tower Gang podcast?
Oh, it's
happening?
at 9 o'clock tomorrow night. Thank you for asking, Toad. It'll be at the Mises Caucus tent. If anybody would like to come, it'll be way more jovial and uplifting than this dire conversation was. Thank you guys so much for your time. Subscribe to Liberty Lockdown. Thank you.